The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Meanwhile, to a Fox News alert, Israel is signaling plans for a broader offensive in Gaza. It's going on right now after launching a wave of airstrikes on Hamas targets overnight.
This marks an end to the fragile ceasefire as the terror group refuses to release the remaining hostages, any alive, including American Eden Alexander of New Jersey.
The IDF saying it hit dozens of targets, going after Hamas targets like officials, leadership, and infrastructure.
The first stage of the ceasefire ended 2 weeks ago. Negotiators have yet to hammer out a second stage, which would free the remaining hostages. Israel's defense minister saying this, quote, "The decision comes after Hamas repeatedly refused to release our hostages and rejected all proposals presented by U.S. President's envoy Steve Witkoff, as well as the mediators." Now, as Israel renews its offensive against Hamas, President Trump is also giving a warning to Yemen's Houthis and Iran, posting this online. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran. And Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and the consequences will be dire. And Israel says that it will continue to lay out this military pressure, something that it says it will do as long as necessary.
The IDF says that it learned Hamas used the pause in fighting to stock up on weapons in preparation for new attacks.
Using the pause to stock up on weapons. Turns out you can't trust Hamas. It's amazing. You look at the March issue. We're in the month of March right now. The March issue of the Trumpet. Talk about tomorrow's news today. There's an article in there my father wrote. President Trump has betrayed Israel. This was a bad deal for Israel from the beginning. And here we are. They're still holding, Hamas is, 59 hostages, including one American, as you heard there. And the ceasefire is now over. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We appreciate you joining us on today's show. You can get to the live video stream of this program at trumpetdaily.com or at the Rumble channel, rumble.com/trumpetdaily. The live, actually not live, but the replay each night is at Live from America, LFA TV at the Rumble channel as well. The email address, if you'd like to submit some feedback, td@thetrumpet.com. So the ceasefire falls apart. The whole world's in realignment. We've made this point repeatedly. But here we are again, and perhaps, I mean, this happens just following this past weekend, where God's people were banding together, praying in earnest for God to show us his will as the work expands, particularly in the region of the Middle East. And maybe this is a good thing, giving Israel a chance to finally eliminate the Hamas threat, and just ahead of a pretty big summer for us, for Celtic Throne, as we tour Israel, as we tour the UK as well. A big year ahead for God's work with our institute, a couple of excavations in Israel also. So perhaps things calm down a bit, hopefully, before the summer sets in, and we begin with all those shows and the excavation and so on. We've got one of our professors that we work with from Israel in town tonight, and tomorrow Professor Liebner is going to be giving an assembly to our students. So we're looking forward to that. Looking forward to giving him a tour of the exhibit, the archaeological exhibit in the beautiful lobby of Armstrong Auditorium. So lots going on in the world and in God's work as well. Israel launched airstrikes against Gaza early Tuesday, so that's today, killing hundreds of Palestinians, says the AP. So already you get the unbiased reporting. Hundreds and hundreds. Oh, they're killing relief workers. I'll play you the truth on that here in fact, let's just play this now. This is clip 9.
But I want to tell you a story here, what happened over the last several days. The IDF conducting operations against Hamas in Gaza. On Saturday, the IDF attacks 2 terrorists operating a drone in the area of Beit Lahia, that's in northern Gaza. So the IDF takes out these terrorists. Then you have a headline several hours later from the BBC saying the IDF carried out a strike and killed humanitarian aid workers in Gaza. So that all comes out. And just a little bit of time after that, the IDF says, what are you talking about? We killed terrorists in Gaza. These were actually terrorists who dressed up as journalists. And I think a total of 6 terrorists were killed, including one who participated directly in the October 7th massacre, and another who was just released in the very last hostage deal. He went right back to terrorism, affiliated with the Islamic Jihad. And once again, Israel being slammed in the media, accused of attacking aid workers. That was the headline. And several hours later, we revealed, no, these were terrorists dressed as journalists, and Israel took out 6 big terrorists in Gaza.
Isn't that a surprise? That
Real
those
surprise.
that get released back into the society go right back to committing acts of terror, right?
I think the number is like 50%, if not higher. I think it was 80%. Those released in the Gilad Shalit deal, I think 80% went back to terror, and more recently, over half go back to terrorism.
It just goes to show again, what is the immoral nature of these prisoner/hostage exchange deals. And at some point, you got to hope that Steve Witkoff and Netanyahu are changing the game plan, right? You can excuse what happened from Netanyahu's perspective while Biden and his team were the ones authoring these deals. But now there needs to be a new paradigm. And what we're seeing is that we're negotiating with hostages, which is exactly what you don't want to do. But by the fact
negotiating with terrorists.
We're negotiating with terrorists in order to get back the hostages.
That last bit there, that's just a nice way of saying that this is a horrible deal for Israel. Has been from the beginning. A pretty big fail on the part of the Trump administration, and all the tough talk, you'll remember. The fact that what's going to break loose if they don't return these hostages? There's an American hostage still in custody in the Gaza tunnels, in the Hamas tunnels. And now the war resumes. According to the Gaza Health Ministry, the AP helpfully reporting the Gaza statistics from the Hamas Health Ministry. At least 404 people were killed in the strikes and more than 560 wounded. Take that with a grain of salt, of course. AP says Benjamin Netanyahu said he ordered the strikes because of a lack of progress in talks to extend the ceasefire. The White House said it had been consulted and voiced support for Israel's actions. So the White House saying, giving the nod of approval. Nothing else has worked. Betraying Israel at the start didn't work. Hamas just had time to refuel, to stockpile more weapons. What a missed opportunity. Israel had them so close to being utterly, totally defeated. And now they've had a chance to regroup. Hamas's response, the militant group accused Netanyahu of upending the ceasefire agreement and exposing Israeli hostages to an unknown fate. So they're threatening Israel. We're going to kill even more if you don't stop firing upon us. If you don't stop firing upon our terrorists dressed up as journalists or as aid workers, as you just heard there. And then the BBC and all these Western media agencies, just so quick to repeat the Hamas propaganda. As if we haven't seen this before. The Jerusalem Post, Israel began a new round of airstrikes overnight. The strikes began after midnight and continued overnight between March 17 and 18. Hamas has claimed that Israel broke the ceasefire, but it is Hamas that sought to stall since March 1st when the first phase ended. Further on, Hamas had sought to delay talks in Doha over the last 2 weeks. It refused to release new hostages on March 1, March 8, or March 15. Hamas should have released 9 hostages by now. They won't keep their word. They won't return the hostages. It says instead, the terror group put out a statement on Friday claiming it was ready to release the American hostages held in Gaza, Eden Alexander, and also 4 deceased hostages. Alexander is believed to be the only living American hostage in Gaza. However, Hamas appeared to be deceiving Israel and the U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff. Witkoff, who was sent by Trump to secure the ceasefire in January, had reportedly offered a bridging deal to end the impasse after March 1. Israel supported his proposal. Hamas did not. So there you go. And at the same time as this is happening, I mean, just look at the strong position of President Trump's administration here at home as it cracks down on these terrorist sympathizers on college campuses. Janine Pirro, she had something to say on this. I think there's a clip within this from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who basically says, I don't see why that this is a complicated thing. I mean, if they're hardened terrorists on our own soil, we're going to get them out. So it's just common sense. And yet here we are over in the Middle East. Here we are trying to negotiate with hardened terrorists. We're releasing, by that I mean Israel, they're releasing terrorists who are going right back into the battlefield. You've got one taken out just today that helped plan October 7. And these are the people we're trying to negotiate with. I mean, some of this common sense, this hardline position that you're seeing here in America, I think we need to take some of that over to Gaza. Listen to clip 4.
Ever since pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil was arrested 2 weeks ago, protests have been heating up. This weekend, hundreds of activists in New York City demanded his release. Secretary of State Marco Rubio isn't fazed by any of it. He says if you're coming to this country to start trouble, you better think again.
We don't need these people in our country. We never should have allowed them in the first place. If he had told us, I'm going over there and I'm going over there to become the spokesperson and one of the leaders of a movement that's going to turn one of your allegedly elite colleges upside down, people can't even go to school, library buildings being vandalized, we never would have let him in. We don't want terrorists in America. I don't know how hard that is to understand. We don't want people in our country that are going to be committing crimes and undermining our national security or the public safety. And if you violate the terms of your visitation, you are going to leave.
The chaos at Columbia University is only scratching the surface of Ivy League activism. The DOJ says Brown University has been a hotbed of pro-Palestinian rhetoric. One deported professor had sympathetic photos of Hezbollah leaders on her phone. That same professor admitted to investigators that she had visited the Hezbollah leader's funeral when she visited Lebanon several months back. And over at Cornell University, 2 grad students could have their F-1 visas yanked after they led a protest that took over a campus building. But the Trump administration isn't backing down. Millions of dollars in Columbia University grants have been slashed, sending a message to the rest of America's universities. And that's not all. The DOJ is now investigating if Columbia helped cover up the identity of student activists. The battle between the Trump administration and the Ivy League is only just beginning.
The battle. Well, yeah, we want to get them out. There's a hard line stance here. And yet we seem to give the terrorists in Israel's backyard the benefit of the doubt. I mean, yes, President Trump did give his nod of approval for the end of this ceasefire, for Israel to resume its attack, its counter-attack, I should say. Remember, October 7 started this. And this Jerusalem Post piece talks about how that Hamas wants to dial it back to October 6 and pretend that it can just get away with holding hostages until you return 2,000 Palestinian terrorists. That's what they're used to. This Jerusalem Post piece says, the fact that Hamas created this scenario by provoking Israel, the terror group believed it could turn back the clock to October 6 and that it could hold almost 60 hostages and get away with it. It quotes Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel will from now on act against Hamas with increasing military strength. Strength. So that's what we're seeing this morning, overnight. Here's clip 2 from Fox News.
what Israel did last night is a preemptive strike, which serves two purposes. One, to signal to Hamas that, as you said very correctly, we are done waiting for you to release our hostages. And if you don't release hostages, there's a price to pay in blood. And two, to prevent Hamas from launching additional attacks against Israel.
Here again, there's a price to be paid. And President Trump has said as much multiple times. Play clip 3.
This was always going to be where we would end. Hamas was never going to abide by the agreement, right?
You know, we had hoped otherwise. Ever since President Trump came into office, there have been negotiations directly with Hamas. Steve Witkoff went and actually spoke with some of their representatives, and there was a hope that they would release the hostages and they could start rebuilding Gaza, but that just simply hasn't happened. It's been 2 months. And just last week, we heard that maybe Eden Alexander, the American hostage, was going to be released. That hasn't happened. And at some point, the Israelis had said, this is enough. We have to go in. Remember, their original objective was to defeat Hamas, to stop the terrorist organization that was attacking Israel. I think maybe now that is going to be their plan, and they're going to go and try and finish it.
A lot has changed since they were fighting last. We have a new president, number one. Number two is you also have Hezbollah brutally diminished, so there's no more distraction really from the north for the most part. And Iran is sitting back right now, lost their pathway for moving arms through Syria. So the Middle East has changed a bit.
This issue, by the way, the March issue, I mentioned it just a moment ago, but yesterday on the show, I went through that first article my father wrote, The Message in the L.A. Inferno, just talking about the message behind all of these so-called natural disasters. And then there's a big feature right after that one on why God is saving America through Donald Trump. Why is he doing it? Why are there so many positive changes here at home? But then the very next article, President Trump betrayed Israel. I mean, you're getting a mess in this one issue. How unique is the truth of God? There's your March issue of the Trumpet magazine. If you haven't subscribed yet, the number there, 1-866-930-3024. There's no cost or obligation. All that you get is a free 1-year subscription of tomorrow's news today, and a strong warning at that. Where are these events leading us? My father wrote in that March issue, he said on January 7, Mr. Trump warned in a press conference that there would be terrible consequences if Hamas didn't release the hostages before his inauguration. That was 2 months ago, more than 2 months. He badly wanted to show that his words have impact, and he wanted a ceasefire in place to end the war before he took office. It was so important. Everything has to be done. You'll recall what was happening even the weekend before the inauguration, as Witkoff was over there and basically imposing America's will on Israel. A horrible deal from the beginning. This is just 2 months ago. This is recent history. So when Hamas offered a deal, even a terrible one, he pressured Israel to take it. You got to do it. I'm coming in. I'm a peacemaker. And we've got to have a ceasefire. Brendan O'Neill at Spiked Online said, for me, this raises red flags about Trump's approach to international affairs. And my father agreed. There's some red flags here. We got to talk about it. For all the good that this administration is doing, or has done already even, at home, you see it, cleaning up college campuses, fighting the Ivy Leagues, getting your DOJ on the move, upholding law and order here at home. It says here, to elevate the peace of mind of America's incoming rulers over the right of the Jewish state to defeat the anti-Semites that threaten its very existence seems disastrously short-termist. Do Trump's advisors not appreciate what is at stake in the Middle East? That's a quote, again, from Brendan O'Neill. What is at stake here? I mean, Jerusalem's like the powder keg that's going to set off World War III. Most people don't know this, but that's why we observe Jerusalem closely. We've got a booklet, Jerusalem in Prophecy. We've got another one on the King of the South, the Middle East in Prophecy. It says here, Trump will say he won the peace, But the price of this peace is high indeed. The halting of Israel's just war on modern-day pogromists who loathe America as much as they do Israel. Again, quoting from O'Neill. Further on, my father says in his inaugural address right before announcing this deal, President Trump said, "My proudest legacy will be that of peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be." I mean, that's a good goal. My father praises it in the article. But sometimes you have to eliminate the terrorists. If you have to do it to preserve peace and unity on college campuses in the Ivy League, well, you need to do it in Israel's backyard as well. Instead, we sit down and negotiate with them. Melanie Phillips wrote, "Trump doesn't want a war on his watch. He's virtually promised the American people that he will bring an end to war. And so he brought an end to it, quote unquote, on January 20th. And where are we today? March 18? A little less than 2 months later, and war resumes." It makes you think of Isaiah 59, the way of peace. They just don't know the way. It says here, "Sometimes an enemy arises with whom any agreement is a deal with the devil." That's quoting Melanie Phillips. My father says, absolutely right. The world's full of grave dangers. Sometimes you must fight or else be taken captive or destroyed by evil people. The tyrants are on the loose. I saw a link at Citizens Free Press just before going to air. Vladimir Putin making president. Today was the big phone call with Putin, and Putin making the president of the United States wait for like an hour. Yes, sure. He's at some conference. President Trump can wait for a while. These are the people we're dealing with. They don't want peace. They want war. They want conquest. They want to kill Jews in the case of Hamas. And on October 7, they killed a lot of them, triggering this series of events. How do you deal with it? My father says Mr. Trump does not want war, but sometimes you can't avoid it. The Israelis certainly know that. After being attacked on October 7, what else could they do? I mean, what were the options besides a counteroffensive, besides fighting back, besides killing the terrorists that killed your citizens? This is our modern world. This is the world of Satan the devil. He's the god of it. It is interesting how all of this is happening right after, as I said earlier, the church banded together and were admonished to pray earnestly for some open doors so that we can expand the operations, particularly in the Middle East. The New York Post says Israel's latest assault on Gaza is part of a fresh campaign to make Hamas feel pain like they've never done before. The strikes that killed more than 400 people early Tuesday were the start of a very different type of military campaign responding to Hamas's refusal to release the final 59 hostages. Imagine this. I mean, if the leadership in Gaza cared about its own people, it would say, here's the remaining 59, give us back our 2,000 or whatever, and, we'll make peace. We want the ceasefire to continue. They don't want the ceasefire to continue. They want to keep firing away. They want to keep using their own citizens as human shields. They want to keep dressing up their terrorists as journalists and relief workers. And then the BBC rushes to their defense. This is the world we live in. This is the world we live in. But as I say, maybe hostilities will simmer down by the time the summer hits. Israel, since October 7, they haven't had much in the way of touring performers, singers, concerts. They just haven't had much for a year and a half because of October 7. It just is seen as unsafe for performers to go over there. So we're excited to be traveling through the little state of Israel in just a few weeks' time, and hopefully the Israelis will turn out in droves to see a magnificent show in Celtic Throne 2. When we come back, we'll shift gears a little bit, turn our attention to Europe, to the buildup of the German military machine. The new Prime Minister of Canada is over in Europe as a sign, basically, a signal of more and more opposition to the United States, to President Trump. Lots and lots happening in the world as we're seeing, really, a world realignment. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. We'll be right back.
In 1994, Trumpet editor-in-chief Gerald Flurry asked, "Is Iraq about to fall to Iran?" It was a bold statement at the time, but over the next 20 years, this forecast became reality. Today, Iran is the undisputed king in the Middle East. In the early 1990s, we identified Iran as the prophesied king of the South. In the book of Daniel, it says this king of the South will push against the king of the North. These prophecies are being fulfilled before our eyes. To learn more about these incredible prophecies, request your free copy of The King of the South. This booklet examines the history and current events of the Middle East under the light of Bible prophecy. To learn more, please visit thetrumpet.com.
It's his first official foreign trip since being sworn in last Friday. Mark Carney's decision to visit Paris instead of Washington, as is usual for Canadian leaders, comes after Donald Trump escalated trade tensions with both Ottawa and Brussels and floated threats of annexing Canada.
As the rift with the United States grows, Canada and France have committed to developing a new security and intelligence partnership. Carney's government is currently reconsidering the purchase of US-made fighter jets in light of the trade war.
A world in realignment. It's pretty obvious. I mean, he's a Justin Trudeau wannabe. And so there's already going to be some built-in anti-Americanism, or at least anti-MAGA. And as I said last week, I mean, some of the abrasive language could be toned down, that coming from the Trump administration. But to see these reports from Europe that the U.S. is no longer allied with Canada or Europe, do we hear what they're saying? As I said last week, you have to see all that's happening from their perspective. They see America as an enemy. Now, at some point, Canada's probably going to swing back into America's camp because they're an Israelite nation. But that said, the world is in realignment, and so much of it is just simply in opposition to Trump. Listen to this again from France 24, clip 6.
For the first time in 84 years, since 1941, you have a U.S. government which is not allied with Europe. It is not allied with Canada. And in that circumstance, Canada, Europe, and other countries look at each other and say, how do we build up these capabilities without necessarily going through Washington?
For the first time in 84 years, America's not aligned with Canada. America's not aligned with... Who is America aligned with? Oh, Putin. Okay, got it. Here is Donald Trump trying to get a ceasefire with Ukraine and Russia. He's trying to help, and it's misguided. It's a miscalculation. He wants peace, as my father said in the article. That's a noble goal. And here you hear the talking heads internationally, and they talk about him as if he's a warmonger, as if he's trying to create a war with Canada or with Europe. And here he's telling Europe, rebuild your military. You've got my hearty endorsement. This world is about to explode. You think about Isaiah 1, where it talks about, God says to us, come and reason together with me. What we're seeing is human reasoning run amok. I mean, everyone. This is assuming, oh, well, this means this. And of course, because he said this tweet, so that means that. And yeah, 84 years of alliances. It's just blown up. Out the window. Satan is preying on this kind of thinking, this kind of reasoning. People don't even realize how dangerous all this rhetoric is. We've got an article, by the way, at the Trumpet magazine about this illegitimate prime minister in Canada. I mean, really, if conservatives were reasoning and thinking the right way, they'd be taking aim at this individual, trying to get rid of him and his government that's brought so much socialism and taxation to the people of Canada. And now you've got a U.S. president who, like Canadian leadership, European leadership, he wants to put his own country first. How dare you? I heard a clip this morning where the guy was saying there's a lot of restrictions trade-wise between the provinces in Canada. How dare Canada would put tariffs on other provinces in their own country? Happens all over the world. Everyone does it. You listen to the coverage and you would think only America does it. Only America charges tariffs. It's pretty amazing to watch. One more from France 24, clip 7.
So what you're seeing is certainly not something that will fill the gap that the U.S. has provided in security for more than 80 years, but it is a start, and it's an indication that this may finally be a world which is one in which the United States is not necessarily at the center of where France, Canada, or other countries go next.
And that clearly the message that Mark Carney is trying to send.
A world with the United States not in the center, these people say, hopefully. They are, I mean, it's like King of the Hill. America's been at the top of the hill for so long, we got to knock them off. They're not at the center anymore. They can't be, because Trump, because bad Orange Man, Orange Hitler. He's not allied with Canada, he's not allied with Europe, and on and on and on it goes. This is pretty remarkable. Again, it's just a commentary that is really not unusual now because of the times that we're in. But just listen to this from Bloomberg Television. This is clip 8.
Let's turn our attention to the other key, kind of almost historic moment that we are going to see later on today, and that is the Trump-Putin talks that are going to take place surrounding Ukraine. I think the symmetry of these two stories is really interesting. These talks come on a day when potentially we're talking about waking Germany up as a military force once again. I think that is interesting from a historical perspective.
Well, I should say it is. I think it is interesting from a historical perspective. Yeah, that's right. Did you hear the White House press lady the other day? When you had some low-level government person in France saying, give us back the Statue of Liberty. And she says, well, I would remind this low-level operative in France that were it not for the United States, French people would be speaking German right now. Oh, so you do remember that history. Oh, so Germany just about did take over the European continent and the whole world if they could have. From a historical perspective, I think that this is significant. Well, you're right about that. Germany rebuilding its military machine, happening at the time that Donald Trump he's reaching out to Putin. We're living in a world that's being transformed before our eyes, and it's not for the better. In the Kiev Independent, Putin's war in Ukraine has catalyzed Europe's shift from pacifism to military leadership, with Germany leading the way. Like I say, these are common headlines now, and nobody's concerned. Nobody cares about it. It's amazing to watch. More broadly, Merz appears prepared to embrace European leadership. Despite being the EU's largest economy, Germany has long been reluctant to assume a genuine leadership role in Europe. Yeah, they're just reluctant. They don't really want it. They never really wanted a military machine. They don't want to lead a European empire. No. Come on. Look at the history. From a historical perspective, I think this is significant. Well, yes, it is. It is. The combination of Russia, revanchism, and U.S. isolationism has made this stance untenable. I mean, Europe, Germany, they have no choice. We need a military machine. As Europe's most populous country, situated in the continent's geostrategic center, Merz says, Germany must take greater responsibility for leadership on defense. In other words, on military spending, on a united military. Germany, we have to take the lead. I mean, the U.S. has abandoned Europe. The U.S. has abandoned Canada. The U.S. is not even an ally, says one guy. Once a peace agreement is reached, Europe will have to act as its guarantor. And that means delivering effective deterrence against Russian aggression. We got to do it. Trump's abandoned us, and, you got Putin. So we got to stand against Putin. So we need a military machine. And people are applauding this and acting like it's going to bring peace to the world. They're acting like an arms race is going to bring peace. They're acting like sitting down with Hamas is going to bring peace. They're acting like getting on the phone with Putin is going to bring peace. You can see the stage being set. The ambassadors for peace are going to weep bitterly, the prophet Jeremiah said. We're going to find out. We're about to find out how successful our peacemaking really and truly is. It's not. It's not going to be successful. That's just the truth of the Bible. And we've got to be emotionally prepared for this. It says here, a credible nuclear umbrella is essential. That's why Merz has suggested replacing U.S. nuclear warheads in Europe with French and British alternatives. Ho-hum, let's move on to the next story. When NATO intervened in the Kosovo War in 1999, Germany's then Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder ruled that sending ground troops to fight in a country that had once been occupied by Hitler's Wehrmacht was unthinkable. No, we can't do that. But we can let the United States do the dirty work for us as we try to rebuild our empire behind closed doors so that the international press can say, Germany's always been reluctant. It's a reluctant leader, never really wanted a military. Delusional. Historical ignorance, and certainly an ignorance of Bible prophecy as well. Today, as Merz seems to recognize, the unthinkable has become necessary. The unthinkable, just think on that for a second. The unthinkable, we couldn't even imagine this scenario. Under no circumstances could this have ever happened. Now it's reasonable. Now it makes sense. Now it's thinkable. Now we are thinking about it. We're planning for it. We better buckle up. It says here, only if Germany and Europe as a whole puts aside its moral and political inhibitions can it continue to perform its most important role as a global force for peace and a defender of democratic principles. Now ask yourself, when is the last time in history you thought of Germany first as the defender of democratic principles? Come on now. The defender of democracy. That would be Germany. So says this column. We've certainly come a long way in 84 years or whatever it is that commentator said. It's a new world order. Deutsche Welle, €1 trillion impact. What easing the debt brake means for Germany. This is from Politico. It says here, this time joint bonds really might forge a more united Europe, with Donald Trump triggering the biggest reordering of the European security landscape since World War II. Debt issuance may not sound like the most urgent matter in hand, but supporters of a more deeply integrated European Union reckon bonds for rearmament are crucial to realizing their federal dreams. This is like a Plain Truth article that you would have read in the 1960s. Seriously. It's at Politico. Trump's insistence that Europe will have to step up and look after its own regional security and provide Ukraine with security guarantees against Russia is pressing the EU to raise cash fast for military investments. It says only 6 weeks after U.S. President's inauguration, the European Commission announced a plan to raise $150 billion of joint debt to finance European weapons purchases. It's a large sum for EU-level bonds, outstripping Russia's entire projected military spending in 2025. A world arms race. Is this going to bring peace? Is this how we make peace worldwide? It says here, for supporters of a stronger EU, issuance of joint debt brings them closer to their long-desired Hamiltonian moment, a reference to the efforts of the first Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, who helped unify the U.S. by consolidating the debts of disparate states into federal bonds. In parallel, a political reorientation in the bloc's largest economy, Germany, has meant the traditional frugal country is finally changing its attitude toward debt in order to finance a modernization of its underpowered military. Taken together, these are changes that will be difficult to reverse, even if peace returns. See, it's going forward. Doesn't matter what happens. Donald Trump could organize a ceasefire today between Putin and Ukraine. It's too late, though. He's not an ally of Europe, okay? This is the narrative. He's not even an ally of Canada, okay? So we have got, even if peace breaks out, Europe needs a military. That's the message here. And they're justified. It says here, what happened in Germany is a huge change, according to this one commentator. And this change will also be very, very consequential for European policy. It is, he's right. I think this is very interesting from a historical perspective. Yes, it is. Gutman Wolf, senior fellow at Bruegel, said the EU's move could prove as fundamental as the Hamiltonian moment. Says the war in Ukraine has also forced European policymakers to consider major fiscal adjustments that were previously unthinkable and which have long been seen as a first step toward deeper union. Deeper, closer union of states. Of course, there has to be the downsize to 10 kings, 10 groups, giving their mind, their heart over to the beast. That's Revelation 17. All of that power. Germany's relaxation of its debt brake for the military is at first glance strictly a national decision, one that it will put to the vote in its lower house Tuesday, but the jettisoning of the national taboo on debt suggests a softening of its long-held fiscally conservative stance. They're changing everything. They're changing the way they spend money. They're changing the way they manage debt. They're opening up the purse strings. They're ready to spend. They're ready for their military. And even if peace breaks out, it's going forward. Herbert Armstrong wrote an article back in 1934, over 90 years ago. It's called Is a World Dictator About to Appear? I think we've got quite a few excerpts of it, if not the entire thing, in He Was Right. He was right. This is the signature prophecy of Herbert Armstrong. We're almost 100 years in. Mr. Armstrong says, ever since the pharaohs ruled in Egypt, on down through ancient Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, on to Napoleon and then the Kaiser, there has been a lust for power to rule the world. What a big picture perspective. This has been the story of man. Like Churchill said, it's the story of war. It's a lust for world conquest. It's a lust to rule the world. Today, at least 3 major world powers seek to rule the world. Talks about Russia and Japan and Italy. It says here, 3 or 4 short years ago, many laughed and scoffed when we said there would be another world war in 5 to 7 years. They do not laugh and scoff today. Everyone knows the next world war is coming, and soon. Every move for peace has failed. Every move for peace. There was a lot of movement for peace in the 1930s. And guess what happened in the 1940s? Or at the tail end of the 30s, leading into the 40s? War on a mass scale. World war. Even as you had all of these diplomats hopscotching around the globe, trying to make peace, trying to solidify a ceasefire, making peace deals with terrorists. We haven't learned from this history. I mean, in a lot of ways, as much as they should have seen what was coming in the 1930s. Winston Churchill certainly did. But look at the Western leadership at that time. Their heads were just completely buried in the sand. And in so many ways, we're without excuse today because of what we see, because of the fruits of man's leadership, and because we have this history that's not even a century old, that should be just sounding the alarm. We're repeating history. We're seeing a world in realignment. We're seeing all of these nations opposing the United States, eventually Britain, Canada too. And we're seeing a nuclear arms race, a military arms race, a rapid rearmament of Germany of all nations. It says here, today, Prime Minister MacDonald of Great Britain and President Roosevelt are striving frantically to avert or postpone the impending next world war while the nations prepare even more feverishly for war. Just remember this. Just remember this. The more you hear people talking about peace, that all this is happening as nations prepare even more feverishly for war. War fever is on the rise. 3 or 4 short years ago, many laughed and scoffed when we said there would be another world war in 5 to 7 years. They don't laugh and scoff today. I think I read that, but he says further on, mortal man cannot prophesy the turns and trends of coming events. Only God knows the end from the beginning. That's why we have to look to God. That's why he refers to prophecy as sure, the sure word of Bible prophecy, Peter wrote. We need God's perspective. We need to know tomorrow's news today. We need to know where these events are leading. War fever is in the air. If your eyes are open to the truth, you can see it. You can feel it. It says here, listen carefully, seriously, to God's prophecy of this event and his solemn warning of what shall then come quickly and suddenly. He refers to 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 1 through 3. How that war is going to spring upon us like a trap. It says here, but of the times and the seasons, you have no need that I write unto you, Paul wrote. This is 1 Thessalonians 5. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, okay, listen, then shall sudden destruction come upon them. When they say peace, when they say safety, then what's coming? Sudden destruction. Now, just as a little microcosm of this reality, look at the Middle East peace. It was absolutely essential that the fighting stop, that we have a ceasefire, that all the hostages are returned on January 20th, 2 months ago. And then this morning, war breaks out again. 59 hostages still being held captive, including 1 American. It says here, and the event that brings it will be the dark and dreadful day of the Lord. This is, again, that article from Mr. Armstrong in 1934. He says, yes, Jesus is coming. He's coming as he went. He is coming soon. He is going to return. I mean, that's the silver lining here. That's the light at the end of the tunnel, knowing that all this culminates in the spectacular return of Jesus Christ. Winston Churchill, I mentioned, he was a lone voice in the wilderness. He was a watchman. A watchman discussed in Ezekiel 33, verses 1 through 6, sounding the alarm when no one else would. He said this in 1937, we seem to be moving, drifting steadily against our will, against the will of every race and every people and every class towards some hideous catastrophe. Everybody wishes to stop it, but they don't know how. They don't know the way. That's what the prophet Isaiah said. It's a noble thing, wanting peace. But we don't know the way, and so we continue drifting towards some hideous catastrophe. And we need God. We need God's prophecies. We need the sure word of prophecy. We need God's prophet now more than ever. We need to heed the alarm as it sounds. As I say, that article from 1934, you just take out some of the names and it applies to today as much as it did then. Almost 100 years old. Mr. Armstrong was there sounding the alarm. I mean, he was to come on the scene a little bit. Well, I guess he was on the scene in a small way in the 1930s, but following World War II, I mean, it was Herbert Armstrong that was loudly proclaiming that signature prophecy for decade after decade after decade. And now look at where we are today. Mr. Armstrong has been dead since 1986. But this church, this work, the Trumpet magazine, all of our literature, the Holy Roman Empire in prophecy, the United States and Britain in prophecy, we continue in those same steps. I mentioned this quote the other day from my father's booklet, No Freedom Without Law, where he says, this is the inspiring and wonderful truth of what God would do today if only we would listen and heed his warning. The world should have listened to Winston Churchill in the 1930s, but they didn't. And the British people only brought him in 1940, after the war had already started. And they learned that Churchill was right. And they turned to him finally. It was almost too late. My father says, here's a big lesson. Kings and presidents should listen to God's apostles and prophets. That is how nations are saved. Nations don't have to fall. It's not inevitable. There is great hope in this message. It's not like it has to happen. It's not like it's inevitable. As I said the other day, I mean, you see examples in Scripture of entire nations being saved by God because they heeded the warnings coming from God's prophet. And as I said earlier, in a lot of ways, I mean, we're without excuse today in ways that we weren't even in the 1930s, because we've got all of this history that's right there before us. It's pretty amazing to watch. Exciting times, for sure. Again, I'll refer you to the Trumpet magazine, the U.S. and Britain in Prophecy, and any of the other booklets that I mentioned earlier. You can get free copies if you call our operators today. That's all we have time for on today's show, the fastest moving hour in broadcasting. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Thank you for joining us on today's show, and we'll see you tomorrow.